well behaved. Hope it stays that way. So shall we begin? Great. So thank you, everyone, for joining us here in person and for our guests online.
Did you unmute? Sorry.
I am unmuted. Yes. Thank you, Jared. But thank you for the reminder. I really appreciate it. My name is Brian Slack. I'm Principal Transportation Planner for the Ulster County Transportation Council. And together, in cooperation with the Office of the Ulster County Executive and Ulster County Area Transit, we're here to work on a project that has been ongoing for close to 8 or 9 months at this point, called the UCAT Route Optimization Plan. UCTC, our office, is a metropolitan planning organization, and as such, we're responsible for doing the continuing and cooperative planning process for the Kingston urbanized area. And as part of that process, we lend assistance to our public transit agency, as well as all of our municipalities, to lend assistance in planning and designs for transit systems or transportation of all sorts, whether it be trails, roads, bridges, or public transit. So tonight, we're at a very important starting point for the route optimization plan. Even though we've been working on it for close to 8 or 9 months, gathering preliminary information. Some of you may have joined our June meeting. We had a meeting in June where we began to kick off the project and gather input. Now we're reaching the next major phase of the project, which our consultant, Jared Toops, will talk about in just a moment. But I just want to stress that today is the continuation of a relatively slow and steady transformation of Ulster County Area Transit that will continue. And we're really working primarily on developing concepts for public transit today. We're not proposing any major changes during this meeting. This is really about gathering input. Welcome, everybody. You can please have a seat. So before we get into the presentation tonight, I just want to introduce a few folks who are here with us this evening. I already mentioned Jared Toops. He's our project manager from Foursquare ITP. Other planning staff in the room, if you wouldn't just mind raising your hands and introducing yourselves briefly. Robert?
Oh, Robert Leewood, Ulster County Planning, School Planner for all. Dennis Boyle, I'm the planning director for Ulster County. I'm going to turn it over to the folks from UCAT just for their here.
Thank you.
John.
Introducing ourselves.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Tony Rose. I'm the director here at Ulster County Area Transit. Welcome.
I'm Tony Trosha, deputy director.
Great. And also here tonight, we have Alexandria. She is our Spanish-English interpreter. So if there's anyone who may require Spanish interpretation, Alexandra is here to assist us with that. Alexandra, do you have a few introductory words to say?
Complete intro, since I haven't heard, pero si alguien necesita interpretación, puede venir hacia mí. If anyone needs interpretation, they can come and talk to me. Otherwise, I will save any more complete intro for when it's needed. So thanks.
Thank you, Alexandra. So again, tonight we're here to present the major next phase 2 of the route optimization plan, where we want to start to present some preliminary concepts for potential changes to the UCAT system. I want to emphasize those words again, preliminary and concepts. We're really here to gather input on some of the ideas that we've been preparing on how route optimization could work for Ulster County Area Transit. And Jared is going to walk us through in great detail on how that process will work.
Brian, can we ask the elected officials in the room to introduce themselves? If we have
Certainly. Thank you, Dennis. Elected officials, please.
Kathy Nolan, I'm the county legislator from District 22, which is west of the western part of the county. And Joe?
Joe Donaldson, District 8, Sopus, Ulster, and Schmidt of Kingston.
Wonderful. Thank you.
My name is Teddy. I'm here as a representative for the office of assembly members on Trust.
Wonderful. Thank you all. Those are my introductory words. So we're going to have a presentation followed by an opportunity for questions and comment. And at this point, I'd like to give the floor over to Jared Toops.
Right.
Mhm.
Right. Good evening, everyone. We're out here for what we're calling phase 2 public meeting. Phase 1, I was here earlier in the summer and we briefed on a lot of the background data that before we even started looking at potential route changes, we collected a lot of information about where people live, where they work, travel patterns, and what was working and not working about the existing routes. We took that, we took public feedback, and we've developed these 2 high-level scenarios for how transit could evolve in the county. So we're here again, collecting more feedback, and I'll be here at least one more time to talk. Okay, great. So I'll start with just like a quick few slides on a project refresh of why we're here and what the overall goals are. I'll do a brief summary of service planning inputs of the different types of things service planners look at when we're designing transit routes. This is going to be pretty high level compared to my last presentation in the summer, where we went really in depth with every demographic layer. We have that memo and that presentation on the project website, so we can talk about that a bit in the Q&A, but if you have more specific questions, I highly encourage you to check out those materials. I have a few sort of just high level results from the public survey we had over the summer. I didn't take the results for every single question. I took a few of the key ones that really kind of informed our service design.
Yeah, front row seats.
Then we'll go into the actual draft scenarios. Rather than go route by route and explain them to you, that's a little lengthy, a little too much talking on my part. I'll spend a few minutes just kind of explaining how the scenarios are at a high level concept. And then we have these boards across the room that you can go and look at each specific route, how scenario A or scenario B plays out for that specific route. I'm here to answer questions either here or on the phone about those routes specifically, but I don't want to start droning about every single route, where it turns, why it operates what it does, unless people ask. I'll give these brief just overviews of kind of our next steps, what we're doing with the feedback that we're starting collecting today, and then open the floor for general Q&A. So our project refresh, the route optimization plan has 4 goals.
Yeah, just go back one. Or no, sorry.
First, we want to just see ridership increase. We want to increase the transit mode share, or it's, of all the different modes people use to get around. We'd like to see transit increase within Ulster County. We want to develop recommendations that are adaptable to an electric fleet transition. The county government has a longer term goal to see a completely electric fleet, and often it's not as simple as just swapping out a conventionally fueled bus for a battery electric bus. There's a lot more you have to pay attention to with how long a day the bus operates, how long it needs to charge. We aren't getting into that level of detail here, but we can develop recommendations that are more easily transitioned. We want to embrace new micromobility models or microtransit where appropriate. I have another slide kind of talking about where everything fell with microtransit, but we were looking at if that's potentially a better solution in certain parts of the county compared to what we call fixed route transit, which is your traditional, it's a bus, it goes to same places on a schedule. And then finally, we're looking to help UCAT adopt a new technology platform of how they operate their services, from scheduling to dispatching to tracking ridership and other data. This is mostly a separate task handled by our sub-consultant, JF Transit, at looking at what software platform can provide the best value and ease of integrating multiple types of data. So how does the service design process actually work? Well, how we're going here is we've taken what we did in existing conditions and for the public, and we've developed 2 high-level draft scenarios, which are kind of the meat of today's presentation. And that's where we are now in phase 2 public engagement. We're showing these high-level scenarios, and we want to hear what people like, what they don't like. I'm not expecting one scenario to just win over the other, unless I'm really good at my job. Most likely, the final will have elements from both and some new ideas as well. After we've developed sort of this final scenario, this proposed final network, It's gonna be built out a little bit further in terms of like the scheduling and just a little bit more detail compared to what you'll see today. And then that proposed final network is incorporating feedback from this public session. Then finally, we're out one more time, and that'll be different. That will say, these are the proposed route changes we're anticipating over the next 1 to X number of years. So a little bit more, this is what's happening unless we get specific feedback that would cause us to change it. We incorporate another round of feedback, and that's how we do this final network. So like Brian was saying earlier, nothing you're seeing here today is final. And I really want to stress that. So yeah, that's where we're at. And then this is a lot of the same information just on the project timeline. We had what we called phase 0 public engagement, which was that original survey we sent out. We use that survey as part of our market assessment, looking at where the demand for transit is, how the current routes are performing. We had more phase 1 engagement where we presented our findings for task 3. Then we moved into task 4, which is what we're working on now, the proposed high-level scenarios. From there, like I said, we're at phase 2. As we get feedback from the public, feedback from UCAT's operators, and from our technical advisory committee, who we met with 2 weeks ago, we'll develop what's called an implementation plan. So it's marrying the strengths and of each of these 2 scenarios together, building it out and taking further, looking specifically, okay, what times would the bus arrive at what locations? And then finally, like I said, we'll be back again to get more input and final round of public comments before things are, I won't say set in stone, but we move forward with action. So when we look at designing transit service, there's kind of 4 big inputs. The first is our market analysis. This is looking at the demand side of transit. Where do we have groups of people living? Where are they trying to go? Where are the jobs? This looks a lot at population density, job density, travel patterns, as well as the presence of different demographic groups who are more likely to rely on transit. So lower income households with 1 or no cars. The service analysis is almost looking at the supply side. We looked at the existing UCAT routes, which ones were higher ridership, lower ridership, or certain ones may be really good at staying on schedule, other ones aren't. Is that there are other opportunities to say, okay, what do we think maybe is keeping this route from succeeding? So very much a demand and supply side of the question. Public engagement. We had our survey out earlier this year. We got over 500 responses, close to 6, which I think is a record for a UCPC survey.
Definitely a high turnout.
Yeah, that was excellent. We got a lot of good feedback. I'd love to say we acted on it all, but it was definitely very insightful. And then finally, we worked to incorporate industry best practices. Lots of transit experience, both local at Ulster County, as well as other agencies across the country, large agencies to smaller, more rural ones. We've seen a lot of what other agencies do to address certain issues. We try to learn from good practices and learn from bad ones to avoid mistakes. So the market analysis, I only have 1 slide covering this, but like I said, there's a full report online if you have more questions. In general, when we looked at things like overall density or propensity to use transit, Kingston and New Paltz definitely show up as like our strongest markets, which they're the 2 larger cities, denser areas, not really surprising to what we were expecting. A lot of the county really lacks the density that's associated with successful fixed route service. This mapping is not showing up too well on this projector, so apologies. So this is just one of the indices where we really start looking at where transit could succeed at higher levels is anything kind of moving from moderate up. So a lot of the county is just pretty low density. That's always going to make it hard to operate frequent service without, massive costs. And this is one aspect of UCAT today tends to serve all the areas that are associated with higher likelihood of transit succeeding in terms of density and major job centers.
Can I ask you a question here?
Yeah.
How come you don't show other peripheral population centers like Poughkeepsie that's connected to Ulster County, even though it's Dutchess County.
Mhm.
Up in Red Hook and Rhinebeck, that's another population area.
So we did look at
And I think
those.
that Dutchess County would connect a whole, it would add a lot of useful service.
Yeah, so we did look at those areas and we knew from existing ridership that like the Poughkeepsie connection was valuable and a popular route. For this specific metric, which is our transit oriented population index, this is our one that looks at demographic groups more likely to rely on transit, right? So lower income, low household, low number of cars, things like that. A lot of those are relative metrics, which means the bigger that we expand an area, if we start capturing larger cities, it might wash out a lot of what we see in Ulster County. Like, you know, these are scored from low to high, right? If I ran propensity for everywhere between here and Manhattan as one model, Manhattan would show up bright red and Ulster in relation would be pretty washed out. So we have to be mindful that these external connections are important, and we did look to incorporate some. You know, Ulster County Area Transit's mission is to serve Ulster County, so we have to make sure that we have a good sense of the local.
But we do have operational authority, as you know, to run into Poughkeepsie and into Newburgh. And we're we are the only public transit agency in the Mid-Hudson region that does that. So other connections are going to be considered as well.
Thanks.
And then, yes,
The area where your insets are is over about half of District 22. And it's gonna be very low density. And it makes sense that it doesn't necessarily show up on every map, but it is a little bit, and I just wanna keep pointing it out that about it's about a quarter of the geographic area of Ulster County is not shown on this map and is an area that does need service.
totally understand that. And in our report, we actually did go back and make sure to say, to describe explicitly, you know, in the northwestern parts of Ulster County, not seeing the propensity scores X, the density scores Y. You know, these polygons on this map are specifically census block groups. I'm pretty sure that that green one Felicia's in is almost the entire same block group all the way. So
I think
So
that
there might be another
census
one,
block
but-
after Shandaken,
Yeah.
which is about the same size as what's shown. So that's.
But we
that's
did
what-
make a point to turn the insets off. We looked at it, and make sure we weren't blinding ourselves. But I do understand that the optics of that aren't 100% ideal. Totally get it. So we looked at a lot of different demographic maps. We also looked at travel patterns of how people were traveling both internal to the county, as well as we did look at connections into Orange and Dutchess in terms of what parts of Ulster County are trying to get outside. Travel in and out of Kingston was definitely the predominant, most common patterns we saw following the major highways. And then southern parts of Ulster County were more trying to get to Orange versus like Kingston. The central part was a little bit more to Dutchess, but there was a lot of overlap. So it's not like there was a clear, you know, everyone south of Stone Ridge wants to go to Newburgh or something like that. It wasn't so cut and dry. There's a lot more on this. I can answer one more question.
Yeah, I just want to know if your traffic patterns come from bus ridership or from traffic in general, the places people go from where to where.
So we did look at ridership, and a separate thing, we looked at where people are riding on routes. The data source we use for this is a platform called Replica that actually looks at all travel modes, and it's trained off of a mixture of like cell phone data and like credit card transactions to get a sense of like the model, what average daily travel patterns are across an area. It's a nationwide data set that's becoming more and more popular in the planning process because it is nationwide. And it's also very high levels of detail. So it's trained on things like, I know it's trained off cell phone pings, I know it's trained on credit card, and blanking on some of the other inputs, but it's a model that's trained on a lot of different.
And it's a model that's geared towards replacement of individual car riders.
That model is technically all travel. So when we looked at travel patterns, we looked at all, we weren't looking at transit
But I
specifically.
mean, for you, for your planning process, is that one of your goals is to replace individual car?
That's part of that increased mode share goal. Yeah, I was trying to make transit a more appealing option. So we also did a service analysis, which is very much looking at the supply side of where the current routes are succeeding or not. So one thing we looked at was just what we call service levels. For the existing routes, which days of the week do they operate? How long in the day do they operate for their span? And what their frequency is. And it's important for us to kind of take this inventory because we want to be very mindful of, oh, is a certain part of the county getting more service, whether it's later in the day or maybe getting less, maybe earlier. Sometimes those trade-offs are unavoidable, but we want to make sure we're very intentional about it. This neighborhood, maybe the bus isn't operating as late, but we are increasing the frequency of it. So we tell people that's the trade-off we're proposing. We also looked at service operating efficiency. That's typically measured as the passengers per revenue hour or passengers per revenue mile. And that's just a general sense of how efficient the route is. How many people are you carrying for the amount of resources you're pouring into it? The higher a route does in one of those metrics, the more we might be hesitant to tweak it too much because something's working. Versus if it has a really low performance in that metric, that tells me, okay, we're putting a lot of resources into this and people aren't really riding. What can we do to make it better and make it more appealing? Then we also just looked at on-time performance. We're always trying to see, is there a turn we can try and smooth out or something that really makes the service unreliable? Because that's another reason people may not ride, is even if they don't mind waiting, it has to be reliable. It's going to come every however often it says it will. So going into a few slides about the original survey we had and what we heard from UCAT. One question we asked is we provided 7 potential priorities for UCAT, and we asked both riders and non-riders to rank them. Pick your favorite, your least favorite. So those 7, that is out of order. That's so the 7 priorities we asked them to rank range from more frequent service, more service coverage, direct service to key employment areas, service that runs earlier or later in the day, so a longer span, more service on the weekend, improved reliability. That's very much we want the bus to come when it says it's going to. Did people perceive that was an issue or not? And finally, ease of understanding. Now, I accidentally showed my hand too early, but the 2 most popular goals we heard were frequency and coverage. And what we heard, what we saw, was that for existing riders, frequency was their #1 priority, and coverage was their #2. And for non-riders, it was the inverse. Their #1 priority was coverage, and second was frequency. And this kind of makes sense. If you're a non-rider, because the bus isn't coming anywhere near your home, you want to have it come somewhat close before you worry about frequency. So why these results do make sense? They're tricky because often frequency and coverage are almost moving in opposite directions. If you have a limited number of buses, you could have one bus route that you put them all on and make that super frequent. Or you split them into several bus routes to cover more area, but then none of those routes are going to be as frequent. So it's a very common thing we see in transit projects like this across the country. Frequency and coverage a little bit butt heads. Okay. We also just asked potential riders what would make them more likely to ride transit. And the #1, they were allowed to select, I believe, up to 3. The #1 request was increased frequency. So while we were hearing requests for both frequency and coverage, frequency was slightly winning out when you go look across multiple questions. So, and these are a lot of the same similar priorities to the previous question as well. You can see frequency was a very strong first place. And then finally, we wanted to make sure that our survey wasn't overly biased towards Kingston. And I'm proud to say that close to 73% of the responses were outside what we consider Greater Kingston. I'm very happy with that result. We were seeing lots of responses. I have them mapped somewhere in the report, but very good overall county representation. And a small percentage of people outside Ulster County who, I guess, were bored or something. So that's a lot of our background info, what we were looking at when we chose this. And now we're moving into our draft scenarios. So we've developed 2 draft scenarios, and I'm gonna belabor this point again. These are not final recommendations, but preliminary concepts really to get people thinking about if I had to choose between A and B, does one appeal to me more than the other? We originally thought that maybe the scenarios were going to show different route alignments or actual paths. You know, one might go from A to B, and another might go from A to C to Allen. But as we looked at the data, we looked at sort of the existing development in Ulster County. We didn't want to reinvent the wheel. There's only so many ways you're going to connect Poughkeepsie to Kingston, right? There's a major road that hits most of the towns along that. There's no point trying to reinvent the wheel, thinking of 10 different ways to do that. So you'll see in both scenarios, it's the same route line. The route's going the same place in both.
Even within Kingston and New Paltz,
Sorry, can you repeat that one more time?
even within Kingston and New Paltz.
Sorry, let me respond. Let me rephrase. This isn't identical to existing. This means identical between our two scenarios, like you'll see on the boards, there's route 2 and there will be a table for it. This is how it operate A, scenario A, and this is how it operate in scenario B. That route 2 would do the same thing in either.
We can actually do the same.
So it's really, our scenarios more differ in like the frequency and the times of day the route would operate, rather than the destinations the route serves.
And are they're basically the same as they are now?
It's a mix. I'll get a bit more into that in a bit. We've also, for now, all of these routes that you see on the board, these are just numbered. We want to kind of take a blank slate and we want to pick something simple. So we just have routes 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. This is not final either. This was just kind of throwing something out there to see if the public responded. If you have thoughts on who I really like, just picking bus 2, or if you really hate it, that's worth for us to collect as well. So where do these scenarios differ if the routes themselves, the destinations they connect, if that's to be the same? Scenario A is closer to how UCAT operates today, and has a very consistent all-day service, whether the route is hourly or every 2 hours, what have you. It does the same thing all day, equal spacing between the trips. Scenario B, we thought a bit more of, can we get more frequent service kind of during your traditional commuting rush hour? So that's typically like 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. and then like 3 to 7 in the afternoon, when most people are commuting to and from work. Can we get something more frequent, more compelling? Your trade-off will be that midday period in between, when most people are, well, I won't say most, but when a lot of people are at work. We sometimes have to cut frequency down that middle day period even further, or maybe the route doesn't operate quite as early or quite as late. So that's the big fundamental trade-off of between the two scenarios. Will I take something that comes more frequently during rush hour? But if you're traveling outside of the rush hour, it's possibly less. Versus scenario A, it's kind of your consistent, you know, every 2 hours or something like that. Like I said, it's generally the same route alignments between scenario A and B, so that's not something you have to worry about. We did try, as we went through this, another kind of service design aspect is we tried to simplify the roads operated on. That was something we heard a lot about the blue and yellow routes in Kingston, is they do one thing on weekdays and one thing on weekends. So we tried to have something that's a bit more simple. This is the alignment, this is the path it takes all the time. And then finally, just to reiterate, these routes are renamed for now. Some are almost identical to the existing route. We just put in a new name for the sake of having it all match. But that's far from final as well. Now, these scenarios are a little ambitious in that both represent approximately a 25% increase in UCAT's operating budget. That was, we wanted to be able to get the ball rolling in terms of, okay, let's show people improvements, tell them, hey, this is more than we spent today, to get gears turning, possibly get people excited on what we could achieve. But even if we were to find that money today, here's that 25% annually, we can pay for it. It's really not as simple as just throwing money at the problem and getting all of the service on the road tomorrow. And there's two big challenges. First is a driver or operator shortage. This is a nationwide issue that was already somewhat of a problem before COVID, and COVID really just exacerbated it. It's very hard to find people with the proper licensing, CDLs, and there's also a lot of delivery companies like Amazon and other major mail carriers who are competing for drivers with CDLs. Combine that with transit often runs a bit later in the evening. It runs 7, sometimes 6, 7 days a week. And it can be hard to find drivers and or retain them. This isn't unique for Ulster County at all, but it does make it to where, yeah, we may have the budget to pay people, but if we can't fill these jobs, you know, if you don't have a driver for the bus isn't going to, right? We also just have to be mindful of transit and vehicle infrastructure. Right now, UCAT has their main facility just in Kingston, and having, you know, a bus start all the way as far down as Ellenville, you have to be able to send a bus driver all the way down there and all the way back. And just depending on when the first bus trip of the day is, this can just be very challenging from a logistics standpoint when you only have one central operating facility and a very large county to serve as well. And then as UCAT looks at converting to electric fleet, that's another thing as well, is where all of our chargers, how far can the vehicles go on a single charge? Does everything have to return to one spot to charge? A lot of that's very much behind the scenes, but it does impact how service is drawn, how it's sold. So those are two things that's not going to pretend we have the answers for them today, but it's additional considerations where even if we got all the money tomorrow, you know, that's not going to get us everything we need to implement a version of this plan. Another question, what about microtransit? We mentioned that as a goal. It was something we talked about and looked at in our analysis. We talked a lot about the role of microtransit compared to traditional bus service. When New York State DOT came out with a grant for piloting up to 5 years of proposed microtransit service. So UCAT and UCTC have filled out a grant application for pilot microtransit zones in Ellenville, New Paltz, and Kingston. These would be designed to somewhat complement one of these proposed networks in terms of just providing a bit more coverage off the main roadway or picking up the slack if certain routes don't operate at certain times of day or on the weekend.
Is that because of the income level that you chose those three? The median income?
These were studied, I believe, in the previous studies that UCAT had done, and overall from a sort of market.
So these trends, sorry, I was answering some of the questions online and I sort of missed a little bit of your presentation, Jared. Those zones were developed through a regional planning effort. Income was not considered. It was a desire to improve service in those areas. I don't think income was the primary component for developing those zones at the time.
Census population.
Best place to have fixed service.
So,
It's tricky. Sorry, go ahead, Dennis.
No, I think you're correct in that, in addition to this, there was also a nice survey grant that was given to a private company.
Right.
To study those zones as well. So that was via, and they proposed the 3 zones. The grant that the county submitted actually includes using the resources outside of the 3 zones on a periodic basis, say 2 days a week or 3 days a week. That we would actually provide service into the Shandaken area. For some of the things that we've heard with respect to the need to move out of county of Shandaken and also into the Walkill area as well. Looking down in Walkill, we have a lot of people, and some of that comes out. There's a separate planning program that we did on something called coordinated transit, which deals with elderly and disabled. And the public outreach for that showed demands in the southern half of the county to move out of county. And it also did show demands, some of our public responses that showed demands in the Shandaken area and Woodstock area to actually go to some of their doctors and other visits out in the the Delaware County area, Margaretville specifically. So we've looked at those areas and we've tried to essentially take a look at our microtransit and say, what were the services in these areas, but we're going to try to provide service outside of these areas on a different day basis. So you may see 3 days in Ellenville, a couple of days in southern Ulster County, etc.
So I think the main thing I wanted to drive home here, because obviously I don't have the full details of microtransit grant, is that it is being looked at. But, you know, as part of this study, we were trying to determine like, can microtransit replace one of the fixed route services we have today? Because we have to like find that money somewhere. And we weren't we weren't finding a good opportunity in terms of, in the context of this specific project. This funding opportunity came up. That's kind of where we focused our microtransit energy. So that is separate from the 25%, give or take, cap I mentioned a few slides ago.
Now, would the service have like sort of a pulse hub, like, where the buses all, like the schedules are coordinated, so people need to make transfers, and would the buses on some of the more frequent routes operate like on a clock face schedule, so people can always like, you know, show up at their stop at a certain time after the hour and their bus will show up, or is it gonna vary throughout the day?
We haven't got to that level of scheduling yet. We would try to make sure that like transfers are coordinated, or there's a couple of places where we're hoping to achieve, like by having 2 or 3 routes operate on the same stretch of Broadway, that Broadway has more frequent service. So in an ideal world, they're all kind of equally spaced apart, but we haven't got to that level of schedule yet. Yes, ma'am.
I saw that Gateway. I forget their new name, but anyhow, Gateway has created their own shuttle service that I think is available, but it's, you know, it's like an organization who had to feel a need in terms of some transportation routes through Kingston. I just want to note it because, you know, I'm like specific to my brother, trying to figure out how he can get around without it being a day trip just within Kingston.
Mhm.
So I just wanted, I don't know where they got money to do that, or probably they were able to get a van and a driver or something. But
I was just made aware of the Gateway circulator myself just last week. So we are aware of it. Thank you.
So, good news. I'm about done talking to you. We want to spend, rather than me kind of just pontificate on each route and like, we want to give you the opportunity to stretch your legs, go around and take a look at the boards we have around the ring. So there are 9 proposed routes, and we've provided 2 different tables here for you to kind of reference, all right, which route maybe applies. So this first one just takes all the existing UCAT routes and identifies which one or multiple routes is the closest analog. Some of these were almost direct copies, right? Like I can tell you right now, the Route 11 is pretty much exactly the X. Yes, sir.
We live at Birch's, I mean, Sophus, you know, and the bus comes, the yellow bus. Anyway, Saturday hours are good, but to the week, like if I go out at 8 o'clock in the morning, say down the Amherst, whatever, down the plaza, I have to wait, either get back on in half an hour, then I go down there, I have to go back quick, or stay down there for 2 hours, over 2 hours. And you know, and my husband drives and works, but I don't drive, so no. I've been taking the city bus, we lived in Kingston before we lived in Burgess. And we've been married 48 years, and that's how long I've been taking the bus.
Yeah, so that was an area we tried to focus on. There are now 2 different bus routes that will take you from Birch's to the Plaza. And so what our goal would be, and what we haven't gotten to the specific level, is having them be a coordinated schedule. So if each of those routes operated every 2 hours, I don't remember if that's exactly what they are, we would try to have them offset. So it's more or less an hourly consistent connection. So that's one thing, and which 2 routes are those? That is the the proposed network, that's the 10 and the 7. So that was actually an area we tried to be very mindful of the number of trips connecting the Birch's area to the Plaza and to each day. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. So we have 2 different ways for you to kind of figure out which of the proposed routes is most applicable to you. The first just takes the existing and identifies which one or multiple routes would kind of be the successor, if you will. And then the other, we looked at just a lot of the major communities of the county and looked at which routes serve them. So obviously Kingston and New Paltz have a lot of overlap. So depending on where you're trying to get in those areas, there's a lot of potential options versus Phoenicia. Similar to today, there's one main route that's connecting Phoenicia to the rest of the county. So with that, I want to give you some time to.
Actually, before we get up, I want to just let everyone know who's attending online. If there are any questions, you can type them into the chat. And there are a few questions that have been coming in that I'd like to share with everyone. So folks who are joining us online can please continue to use the chat. And I'll just read those questions out loud. One of the questions coming in from Patricia is regarding the shortage of qualified drivers. Wondering if we have any sort of active recruitment program ongoing in Ulster County through employment and training or through Ulster County Area Transit. And not to put UCAT on the spot, but I know that you have done some recruitment, and maybe if you could just give a brief update on how that's gone.
So we did do some recruitment, and one of the things that we do is we work with Office of Employment Training. And if you meet the requirements for them, they will pay for you to go to the driving school in Kingston and obtain your certificate, your CDL, and also pay for your road test. So we've had a couple of drivers go through that program, and it seems to work out. How do you advertise for that? We advertise just on our website, but it is our goal to have a better program moving forward.
Does anyone have outreach goals, like
We,
how to reach people that are?
so we've been doing that. We table at any of the events that we can get to. And, we've been advertising for bus drivers on Indeed, but we're having a hard time with qualified drivers.
Thank you. Right. And yeah, and it's across all employment sectors as well.
What's the starting pay?
Starting pay right now for a full-time bus operator is $23.86.
With full benefits.
Is the training listed, the opportunities for training on the UCAT website now?
We'll confirm that. If not, we can. Thank you, Tony. I appreciate that. Another question that I'll just let everyone know, as a senior citizen living in Fleischmann's, I would like to see service extended into Delaware County with stops in Fleischmann's, Arkville, and Margaretville. Is this being considered? It's a comment that we've heard quite a bit this year in 2024, that service, because folks living in the big Indian Bel Air area generally would travel to Fleischmann's to receive medical care, grocery shopping, things of that nature. We don't have operational authority at this time, and the Z route sort of bottoms out at that far end of the county. So I would recommend, if people are interested in that kind of service, to use our Maptionaire survey tool to provide that input on the routes that go out in that area, because that's information we can use to potentially consider an enhancement. And were you going to talk about Maptionaire?
Yes. Should have had it open. Apologies. So the QR code that you see here or on the board over there opens up another public comment form. What's nice about this one is it's got these lists to kind of help people see, okay, which route applies to me. As you'll pan through each route on a map, we'll have the same listed of the proposed frequencies under A and B. It has a few fields where you can actually leave a written comment on what you like and don't like. But it also, the mapping tool allows you to drop comments on specific locations. So if there's, an area in case that we miss that X and Y, you should be able to just drop it specifically there. Say, hey, we need a bus stop here, or things like that. So it's nice that it's another way to explore the maps and zoom in a bit more, similar to how you would use Google Maps, be a little more familiar with folks. Were there any more questions?
Yeah, if you're organizing something, I can just run through them. Could you advertise the employment and training opportunity through town clerks or cable TV networks, just to get the word out. And I think that's a great suggestion. So we can work with the county executive's office to get an outreach program regarding that opportunity. Those are all the questions I have right now. Again, for folks online, we have about 10 attendees still. If you have other questions, please type them in the chat.
Yeah, so I just wanted to show real quick for these boards around the room, and I can also pull up the digital versions of these.
That's a question about the maps. Do you have a slide that has all the maps overlaid together?
I do not, only because to show the entire county, it becomes really hard to see the interior of Kingston, right? And that in general, we didn't change many of the actual like coverage. We're mostly serving all the same areas we do now. So when I was working on one of those maps, it wasn't telling quite the story I was hoping to. It was very hard to spot the difference without like crazy zooming in.
Would be helpful though to see connections and, transfers.
Yeah, no, it's really good. Yeah.
Is it still having smoke? It's not more transferred than before?
Depends on the route a little bit. We tried to make it so we're not everything fed in the Kingston Plaza, because that's typically where all the transfers happen now. But it's also a major place people are trying to get to. So we tried to have it a bit more, not everything just ends in Kingston. We have a few routes that kind of try to pass through a bit. For example, we have one that's Woodstock to the mall. So that's not just ending abruptly in the plaza, but actually kind of going through. So kind of mixed bag. Well, I want to get one thing and then I'll hit your question. Just for how these boards, we've got 2 maps per board. We've labeled a few, but not all the stops, just to kind of help people orient. And then we have these tables at the bottom that show under scenario A on a weekday, a Saturday, or Sunday, how often it would run in minutes. So 120 minutes is every 2 hours. And then next to it is scenario B and how it would be different. So you'll look and see that for some of these, for example, what we're proposing here is this one would operate hourly during rush hour on weekdays, but not in rush hour, it would be every 2 hours. But to pay for that, we had to cut that span. The route won't operate and lead to the evening. That's where we found the savings to pay for more frequency. So yeah, I encourage you to go around, take some look at these. I can bring them up to you online if we want to talk through them more in a specific route in detail.
Now with the, what would be like, say some of the possible, like, under these maps, or what are some of the, like, frequency levels that you could get to, like, in some of the places like Broadway, where the lines would be interlined then and running, on the same route, and where, I know it seems like some of them are like 60 minutes or 2 hours. What would be like some of the places that, what would be some of the frequency levels, like say for Broadway and Kingston, like a very, or like, main, like right in the center of New Paltz.
Right. So, sorry. Route 2, which is our first one in the series, that's kind of like our successor to the yellow lines. That one is kind of the one that served all of Kingston, not on Broadway, right? Trying to connect all of the high ridership points we saw. But it crosses Broadway often. So if you're trying to get to Broadway, you'll be dropped off at X intersection at Broadway every couple stops. In the scenario B, where we tried to do more rush hour frequency, we think we can fit a bus every 30 minutes. So that's one of the most dramatic differences from what we see today. To get to your specific question about Broadway, I might have to do that math just because it's been a while since I could run those numbers. But we had, I think, 3 or 4 routes operating on Broadway. And just as an example, if each of those routes ran every 2 hours, that would yield effective of every half hour, something going down Broadway. I don't know if that's the specific number, but we have at least 3 different bus routes that if we move forward with one of these, or a system like this, we would try to coordinate the schedules where if it's every, if there's roughly 4 buses an hour, they're trying to space where they're roughly every 15 minutes in an ideal world.
Would the Poughkeepsie bus be trying to be coordinated with the like Metro North departures, or is that not?
That's one thing that the current KPL does. So we would try to maintain that. But we haven't got to that level of like scheduling detail yet.
Is there an effort being made to include all of the census designated areas in Ulster County in one of these bus lines?
We looked a lot at just we looked at general population density and population employment density, as well as the presence of specific groups that we know are more likely to fall in like sort of equity lens. So, people with limited English, low income households, zero or no car households. So that was kind of our driving factor, not so much hitting every place on the map that was identified. Because there are lots of areas where just they really show very low market demand kind of across the board. And so like you could run a bus there if you were willing to pay for it, but we kind of, and looking at it in terms of, okay, we didn't really expand the system in terms of coverage. This doesn't really represent expansion because what we gathered is people find the frequency on the existing lines that we serve generally not sufficient. So it's like we're not really in a position to expand elsewhere when there's still so much to be done kind of in the existing service area, which is not ideal. But we are in even a 25% resource increase is still a limit. We just threw infinite money at it, sure, but I think anyone wants to do that.
Does that also, I keep hearing complaints, I've heard complaints over the years about people in the south of the county being all the way in the west, just trying to go across the bottom to the south of the county.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's the Wallkill or what's going on down there exactly, but is that the same kind of logic? Why there's nothing moving horizontally, it has to go up and back down?
The travel demand, when we looked at like the number of average trips, I don't even remember if that like passed our minimum threshold of like the number of trips that like to cut across the south like that. I also think there's a big mountain in the way, or there's not really good roads.
Super complicated.
Yeah, there's not even, I think, a safe road for a bus to operate.
Go east-west.
Right,
Yeah.
you can't get there from
Um,
here.
So yeah, just the travel demand, and I don't have that map on this slide deck, really indicated that most of the travel is more sort of north-south, following kind of what the major roads do now. Like,
I find it interesting how isolated they are from one another, even though they're much closer than.
yeah. Yes.
I see, the Ellenville, Ulster. It goes from, we have two buses right now that go from Ellenville and from Kingston. I don't see where they get from Kingston to Ulster. Ulster College, there are a lot of students that get on at the plaza.
There is, it's route number 3.
Yeah, so essentially what we did from an operational standpoint,
Ulster College.
yeah, it's sort of like it's like an upside down J.
I know.
Yeah, so it takes over that northern portion of the existing UU route and then continues, hits the plaza, I think passes Golden Hill maybe, and then makes it all the way down to New Paltz. And that was something we heard people saying, I'm more reliant on the Kingston and New Paltz connection. That they're the two densest part of the county. There should be something. That's one of multiple routes that connects universities to each other, which I think is a compelling connection.
You said a little bit about the buses that go up and down Broadway, the intermunicipal buses, or however you would phrase it. Going straight up and down Broadway and hopefully being able to offer more frequent service throughout all the hours, right? Is that what you're saying?
I have to look at the numbers. I was just throwing out some, but we have, multiple routes that would all overlap, and the goal would be they would all do the same thing on Broadway.
What do you precisely mean by the goal? Because I'm looking at the two routes. Oh, 2 and the 7 for the blue, and the 2, 4, 6, and 7 for the yellow. I'm not seeing like a corridor bus that goes from Lower Broadway to Wall Street and back and forth directly.
Yeah, so it's kind of that connection is covered by a few different routes. So for example, should I start? Yeah. Okay, so Route 7, this is kind of the successor. I should probably just pull this up on the screen for the people on the phone. Yes, it's not.
And I didn't see these on the Participate Ulster page again.
They were put up this afternoon, and Jared, before we go, we're going to explain how you can view them and comment on them using a online survey form. You can comment on the map itself.
So Route 7 here, the purple one, is the first of options that would operate on Broadway. So this is similar to the existing Z. Yes. So the core of the route would be dedicated to what it does today of connecting Phoenicia to the plaza and staying on that main street. A limited number of trips because we saw, I don't want to get too in the weeds here. But basically, we saw that Phoenicia to the plaza was kind of the core market providing that connection, and we wanted to make sure, okay, every time this bus operates, it's going to do that. And then essentially, every other trip would either continue north to Bel Air or continue south to Burgess. So for the routes that continue south, so like every other trip, it would finish at the plaza and then it would continue a straight shot down Broadway.
Hope that do precisely, you go Wall Street to, all the way, and then down Broadway, all the way to the bottom.
I would need to zoom in. But I can
Can we
zoom
do that
out.
online? Can we zoom in online?
Yeah, let me get through the other routes and then we can go back.
Okay.
So this would be one of kind of those Broadway trunks. So you have this one's not serving Broadway frequently. It's being compounded by additional routes. We also have the Kingston Poughkeepsie. So this is essentially the KPL. And this one, I think, is almost doing exactly what the Kingston Poughkeepsie link does today of straight shot down Broadway.
Often simultaneously with a blue bus.
So ideally, you know, these two, the schedules would be coordinated way where they're not like right behind each other. And then there was one more. The 4, which is directly behind you, that's the Saugerties connection. What this is gonna do, it's very similar to the existing Kingston Saugerties bus, but it's gonna take Vauxhall and come down the Broadway a little bit closer to the river and choose to go up Broadway to serve more of that core instead of taking like, instead of just immediately heading for the plaza. So we're trying to serve more destinations directly on Broadway as opposed to just taking Albany, going through the traffic circle and immediately going to the plaza. So it's when those 3 buses all overlap that we'll try to have coordinated schedules to whatever that comes out to numbers wise.
That brings up a question about communication, because like right now, for instance, there's no signage at bus stops, and the app has been down and out for a week with no explanation and no apparent urgency of replacing it. So nobody knows how to, I mean, it's very hard to navigate this because we don't have a system-wide map. The communication is not anywhere near adequate. So with having these, though, that could be very useful, but only if we had an entirely new way of communicating with people, because the way that it works now does not work.
We're developing another memo as part of this project of like best practices for communication as it's into like often something big and transformative like this, where you're not just making tweaks, but like really proposing something new. It's a really good way to try new communication methods because people are more likely to pay attention. Someone's not necessarily going to pay attention. You're like, here's a route change on your existing route, and it's impactful, but they're like, hey, whatever. If you say, hey, new route, new name, your old one's going away, that catches their attention, and a lot of agencies use that as like a good chance to sort of like almost
Re-educate people or.
a little bit like re-educate, like sort
But
of.
what about the day-to-day? What about people who don't use the system every day? I wrote the blue box one, and I said, oh, this is why we need a map, because there was no map at the time. Because I didn't know which side of the corner to get on. His response was, a map, I've never heard of such a thing for a bus system. You learn the route. That's how it works in UCAT. You learn the route, and now you know. I'm like, I jump on different routes all the time. That's how it works. You know,
Jared,
so
you mentioned,
that's
that
the way it runs.
that technology is one of our project goals with the technology platform, give a map, like a robust.
So not everybody has access.
Was that
to
something-
technology is my point.
Well, it's a lot of technology in the back end of how you kind of publish its data, and I haven't been a part of the training.
I can answer.
But yeah,
All of the demos that we've had from the software companies that we're using, they will all be a front-facing app. They will also have the maps online, so anyone who doesn't want to use a smartphone or an app on the smartphone would have the ability to also go online and just log into the site.
Will the same platform let you print out a physical map,
Right.
and put it on the station?
Oh, yes, and that it involves a lot of things. It involves enunciation for every stop.
When I
So
first
if
moved
you're,
to Kingston, the bus stop, all I had was :30, and I couldn't figure out what that meant. So, like, there's the baseline.
also
Could
with
be better with
UCAT, we are a flag to stop system. So if you're going down 9W, you can stand anywhere and flag the bus down. So we don't have designated bus stops on some of these more rural areas. In the city of Kingston, we have designated bus stops because people are running out in between their cars. So we designated bus stops within the city of Kingston, but on these really rural routes, it's hard to designate a stop because we're flag the bus service.
But I see your point. I think, the project as currently scoped doesn't necessarily say like, oh, we'll, re-sign all the stops, but we can help figure out like, oh, these are the steps you would need to re-sign all the stops and try to provide a lot of data for that too.
Yeah, it's really important. I mean, people come, like people who are visiting other towns, think, or coming to visit. I mean, we should be able to benefit from people who are coming to the city of Kingston and don't want to rent a car. They should be supporting our bus system, but they never do because you wouldn't even know we have a bus system. You wouldn't know we have a bus system. There's no signage. They don't even replace the signs at Kingston Plaza. Those stay out of date for months before they're ever replaced. So there's no real, it's not in the effort at this point, but it really has to be.
Yeah, I think a project like this is a good chance because it's not little itty bitty changes. It's like, oh, this is something big. This is.
We want people to start riding the bus, no, because as it is now, we don't.
And that's the purpose of the study, is to try to improve service throughout the county so that we can increase ridership. While we still have people's attention, Jared, I was wondering if you could just try to walk people through how to provide comments on individual routes after tonight. And I do want to emphasize to thank you to everyone who's still with us online. We have 8 attendees online, and there's a few other questions that came in. But for everyone here, if you go to Participate Ulster right now and find the UCAT route optimization plan, the survey is posted very prominently at the top, and this is what it looks like. And it will allow you to provide comment on individual routes.
Yeah, so you'll see and this is also, this platform should work on your mobile phone as well. You'll see a page that's just general project introduction and shows you that same flow chart just for context. This next page is also just more reminding people this is high level scenarios. These are not routes that are imminent. And then finally, just for some context, if you're someone who writes blue right now, this is like those tables I showed, just different format. These are the potential routes that you should maybe, so we go by the existing UCAT routes, and then we go by a lot of major communities in the county. So you can pan just through each one. They're in order. So you click these buttons at the top and bottom, and you can just pan in between them. You don't have to leave a comment on a route if you don't care about it. Like you don't live in Kingston, you don't have to comment on the Kingston local. We provide a little written description of sort of what our thinking was or what this route operates as well as a description of the high level service differences. So for the Kingston local, for example, in scenario A, we think on weekdays, it could be every hour, and on the weekends, every 2. Versus scenario B, we think during rush hour, we can fit it into being every 30 minutes. But what you'll see here, I admit it's a little hard to compare. We had to cut back how late the route runs as a result. So that's the kind of debate, I suppose, is a good way to say it. We want to hear from people is if frequency is what we're asking for, these are ways we can try to achieve better frequencies. Are these trade-offs people are willing to make? So you can say there's a slider here to say whether you really like or really don't. If you have a preference on scenario A or B, you can flag that as well. If there's like a specific area, whether it's a stop you think we're missing, or hey, this destination, or I don't think the street works. Sorry, I'm being blank here. You can probably it did. Sorry, there we go. Okay, you can zoom in on the map like you would Google and drop a pin. So we'd like to get to your question about, you were asking about how some of these routes are getting from Broadway to the plaza. The route saying, I think this traffic circle would get really congested. or we should have a stop at the circle, anything. And then finally, if you have some more, a general open field or any other sort of general comments that you don't think fit. And then this is just another way you can jump between routes. Yeah, and so you want to pan through all of them, just start. They go in order they go in numerical.
So this is the method that we're going to use to gather the public's feedback throughout November and into December. If you have particular comments or concerns, if you think the route should go further, if it doesn't go to the destination that you're interested in, that's the type of information we really need to hear from you. And it's what we're going to use to begin to do further adjustments, among other things.
So is this the route that you had the question on how it navigated Broadway?
Well, I mean, there really needs to be a bus that goes from Lower Broadway up to uptown, and then of course they'll have to go in that giant parking lot, I guess. But the main thing is all the walkable areas, main corridor of Kingston, there should be a bus going from downtown to uptown every 20 minutes throughout the day, including Sundays. And I don't see that.
Right.
And it looks like still no service plan for anything for Sundays.
The King's Route 10.
KPL?
Yes, so that's the KPL, so that one's still operating Sundays. Every 20 minutes would be great.
Loop is the other one that currently runs on Sundays. Is that now not going to?
That one, we've covered a lot of those, the areas New Paltz's coverage through the other routes that are connecting New Paltz to the rest of the county. So there's not in this
So you're
network.
getting rid of the New Paltz Loop essentially.
The areas are still covered, but there is not a bus dedicated to New Paltz and nowhere else.
It was the only route in the system that was coming close to an adequate route. It ran frequently, it ran on Sundays, it ran into the evenings, and then they never run it.
Well, those are kind of comments we want to take down.
And I think that that's a really important comment. One of the things recognizing that when we put together the application for microtransit, the idea for microtransit was to run Sunday service, particularly in the city of Kingston area, hearing very much from the city of Kingston that they wanted Sunday service.
Is that a permanent thing? Because we've seen across the country that when you basically rely on what is in effect Uber, you have a very limited ability to grow from that because it's a very limited.
Sustainability is a concern.
Not only from a sustainability in terms of that, but also sustainability in terms of funding.
Right.
So we need assurance that it could be converted to a bus sooner than later and not just always be micro transit.
I think it's been bizarre for a bus that goes all the way from uptown to the roundabout for as long as I've lived here, and I've lived here for 25 years.
Yeah,
And
I
they're
heard
still
that
not
from
on the
council
weekends
members and stuff.
as well. No
Well,
merchants,
we also have-
everyone wants it.
Yeah, so we have this is the kind of feedback we're looking for, 100%. I think we also have some paper comment cards.
Yeah, they are up front. You can just drop some on paper or email us.
How are we on?
We're covered. There's a couple comments that came in that I was able to respond to. Definitely interest in traveling to Margaretville and Fleischmann's, even if only limited. And also Woodstock will be building a new library and opening soon. And if we could provide service to the new library, which I think UCAT probably wouldn't think twice about providing service to the new library, whether it's the current service or any new service that's developed. The question in the back.
Sorry, what's Saturday?
Woodstock, right? So we moved Woodstock to be connected to the mall. So technically, yes.
Technically,
Yes.
no Woodstock there was on Saturday.
Under this scenario, yeah, because we looked at Woodstock's travel demand data of what part of the county they're trying to get to. And we saw a lot more demand for not just stopping at the plaza like the Z does, but to get them to the mall. So we tried to fold it into a longer version of all routes. And so it's hitting all of those destinations in Kingston, but it's still terminating at the mall. But that's again, from what we understand from Woodstock riders, it's okay. This is an option that gets you into more of the city and it's the mall, so you're having more destinations of transferring. Trade-off with this one is, and that's what we want to hear. No, that's not, an acceptable trade-off. So
You prioritize the mall over Woodstock?
we looked at where Woodstock was trying to go. We looked at their demand, and we saw trying to get up Ulster and Albany Avenue. We saw lots of demand, not just dumping off in Kingston. So we wanted to see, can we get them further into the city? But that's a longer route.
What's that feedback based on how much? Would stop.
That's based more on the travel demand data we saw. We saw people just request service in Woodstock, but it's like, we weren't sure, they were kind of vague, like, there should be service in Woodstock, and there is, so we weren't sure how that, like, with that was a frequency question, so we kind of had to look at what the data was telling us on, okay, where is Woodstock trying to go? And we saw a lot of
The data's from driving and
replica, so all trips, not just driving.
Uber.
Yeah, we looked at cell phones, so it's looking at all travel demand regardless of how people are doing it.
My perception is that Woodstock route extending the mall will be very, very highly valued. But it will be a hard trade-off against Saturday for that.
Yeah.
And that's what we want to hear, that's what we
So
want
I
to hear.
think that's the feedback.
Yeah.
Because I think that's a much better route. But maybe you can't do it all the time if giving it daily during the week means you don't get Saturday. So that's kind of the adjustments I think you need, but I know a lot of people that just dreaded that transfer at Kingston Plaza to try to get to the mall, which is what they wanted to do from the start.
So, and I think another thing to point out here is, this network, these two networks we're showing, A and B, both represent this 20-something% increase. So I don't disagree at all about having a 20-minute service that's going through Kingston. But at this point, this is already, I think, ambitious in terms of funding. So it's,
25%. I mean, we spend endless money on cars,
I don't disagree, but
and it's a lot more. The money is a lot better spent. It goes a lot further if you got shared riding.
I think we're trying to take a balance between being ambitious without
We're-
being.
How can we fight?
We factored, well, I don't think anyone needs to fight at this point. But we factored in the new bed tax, which is in effect, that will generate new revenue for Ulster County that's been designated specifically for transit. But 25% at this point was fairly ambitious projection for additional taxpayer funds to go to transit.
Now, could Ulster County go to other, go to other sources like like try to get other grants or like go, to the FTA or something to try to get more funding for transit or like, is there something, any kind of with New York State's climate, initiatives that they're trying to take, is there any funding there to enhance transit
Yes.
beyond just local funding?
Yes, there very much is. And Jared touched on just one of the discretionary funding sources that we are pursuing, and that's a recent grant from the New York State DOT. But UCAT is always looking at new discretionary funding sources, be they state or federal, to purchase capital vehicles and to enhance operations. There's limits still, as we mentioned. No matter how much money we have, there's a limit to the amount of drivers that we can hire. So we're always facing friction from one side or the next, but I think we've been very adept at going after other sources of funding to improve the system.
Sir, could you give us just a brief breakdown between A and B in terms of the number of buses on the road versus A, the number of buses on the road versus B, the number of additional drivers needed and buses needed?
Yeah, give me just a minute for that. So one of the scenarios are roughly the same price when you look at over the cost of the year, how many hours of service it operates. But a big sort of kicker with scenario B is that because it's trying to propose more of this a lot more frequencies happening during rush hour, that's a lot more drivers you have to have out at the same time. So it actually requires more staff than scenario A, just because, I can rely on one driver doing that route all day versus no, if I'm gonna make this route every 30 minutes, I have to have 2 or 3 drivers on it all at once. So that's something we're looking at in terms of does it offer more flexible hiring options of people who don't want to work a full 8-hour day, but something like that. That was part of what inspired looking at this scenario. It's gonna take just a minute to look at.
A cost director at UCAT said that they had a very hard time hiring part-time drivers. there is an excuse that they used for the lunch break situation, because unfortunately they were just, anyway, they were saying, we can't cover, sorry, I might be detecting a bit of frustration in my voice, I'll try to tone that down, but like the only solution we've heard so far in covering lunch breaks is not staggering lunch breaks, but hiring part-time drivers. That was the previous two directors ago, said, well, we've got a really hard time hiring part-time drivers, because if you get your CDL, you don't want to just be a part-time driver. And so
So maybe part-time wasn't the right word, but maybe there are certain people who don't want to work like a full 8-hour day at once, but like whether it's a bit more early. Again, that's a more detailed level of scheduling we haven't gotten to yet. But to answer Dennis's question, I think under scenario A, again, because that scenario is saying basically same service level all day, no real peaks or valleys. We estimate that it'd be about 12 vehicles on the road across the county, versus in scenario B, in the morning rush hour, it gets closer up to like, we estimate it's more like 17, 18. So that's, a not insignificant in terms of when you have to have all of your employees out at the same time. And therefore, how many you hire at once, how the scheduling is implemented, a lot more, I think.
And you need the capital cost for those.
And paying for more buses to be out at once. So even though it costs the same to operate in some aspects in terms of hours, it's sort of forcing you to go a lot of out at the same time period. That has additional expenses.
Now, have you found so far, I don't know if you found this yet, but is UCAT demand more kind of peaky? Because I know like a lot of more like kind of commuter rail agencies after the pandemic have moved away from very peak heavy service to having more, kind of all day consistent service and weekend service. So, agencies like the Metro in Chicago and stuff have moved. Is it different with the bus? So is it more kind of work trips, or is there a lot of other trips that may not fit into that kind of 9 to 5 commuter hour type?
I think what we saw, there are certain routes that I think in the UCAT system that have more all-day demand. For example, the Ellenville route, when we looked at a lot of data, that's kind of very consistent levels. I think I heard that from operators. So that's actually, there are a couple of routes that we did propose a difference between A and B, because what we've heard is, the riders on the Ellenville route value that all-day consistency. There's more, I think, for so many people, they said, if we want something frequent, I don't take transit, or I rarely take it because it's not frequent. And I think this transition to more agencies trying to go for all-day service is definitely a thing. I get the impression that's more in larger cities compared to smaller cities where, the service levels are not nearly the same. And so for some people, I'm not going to wait 3 hours for a bus. Maybe I'll wait, or I'll time my commute for a bus that comes once an hour. Maybe they can be sold for even moving some of their trips. I had a great closing thought, I lost it. But so yes, that trend is something we've seen for sure. But I think there's so many routes in UCAT, and just hearing people on frequency, this is how we're trying to make frequency in a somewhat responsible decision, as opposed to just saying throwing a ton of money at it when the ridership won't be there. Trying to be strategic about where we put that.
are you gonna fill lunch, are there still gonna be lunch breaks?
We haven't gotten scheduling yet, but we definitely would have to factor in.
There will still be breaks in service during the day, twice a day.
Probably, I don't know, that's very, I don't know, I don't want to promise anything on behalf of UCAT, but that's
It's
kind of,
such a huge factor in what makes the bus system not work.
we'll definitely try, I think, multiple options for how to factor in service.
So if there are further questions at this point, I want to respect everyone's time. We're not going anywhere. There's a 6 p.m. session that will be starting as well with the exact same format. You do not need to stay. It's the same presentation, same format. If there are any final questions from folks online, you can submit them now. But, and I'm not seeing any other questions. We still have a few attendees here. I do want to just stress a few final points that, again, Maptionaire is going to be the best method to provide input to us, but you can always contact us through email. And my contact information is available through Participate Ulster as well. The Participate Ulster page is linked on the chat, and we can provide you links to that if you're unable to find it. And finally, we will be issuing a press release later this week that will come out and publicize the availability of this recording, the presentation, all this information and access to the survey, so that if people weren't able to attend, we really want to get the word out about providing comment into this process. With that, at this point, I'm not seeing any other questions from panelists. Are there any other final questions before I shut down the Zoom? I'll keep the Zoom open for another 8 minutes since it's not quite 5:30.
How to find it on, go on the website, how do you find the link within the page on Participate Ulster? I'm not seeing it.
If you go to Participate Ulster, UCAT route optimization plan on mobile, Tanya, it may not be showing. I acknowledge that issue. I put it up. It's a widget on the right-hand panel that I can see online. I will make sure it's prominent in the center so that mobile users see that immediately, and I'll try to fix that tonight.
And it's not on your project documents.
No, it's right at the top. I can see it. I'm gonna just bring up my screen,
QR code to just get to the map share directly.
but I'll make sure that that's prominent. Thank you, Tanya.
It's also right behind you.
Another question.
Maybe like bus shelter location or maybe places where people were congregating that would indicate where you would want to shelters or where there might be.
Don't remember that explicitly for the operator costs. I just wanted to talk to all of them. I would have to look back. I don't know off the top of my head.
But existing shelters and amenities at those shelters, as well as signage, is something that we heard in June. And we heard currently, we have some initiatives ongoing to provide shelters, but it's going to be a need that I think we'll have to address somehow in the very near future, if not through working with Foursquare. We'll look to enhance the location so we have an inventory of amenities. Yes, Mary?
Following up on that, some stops, you can't get to them by walking, where there's no sidewalks on very busy streets. So I don't know if sidewalks have been part of that conversation. Ease or safety of access.
Noted. Thank you.
Actually, to her question, I have constituents in the Wilbur area that they have no sidewalks. They have no bus right now either. So they were wondering, I thought that was a good question that she asked.
And now there's gonna be a big park. There's couple new parks, and now there's gonna be a third big park.
Where was that? I'm sorry.
In the Wilbur area?
Wilbur?
213, near the waterfront, near Feeney's, essentially shipyard.
Yeah.
Right. And we did receive comments regarding access at Eddyville. Thank you for attending. So that would be an excellent comment to add to the survey in terms of enhancing service in those areas.
Okay.
We think that's something we can look at purchase.
I'm gonna get the next meeting. Now, just like, I'm not gonna like the.
So
Yeah.
at this point, everyone is getting up from the meeting, so I am going to shut off the feed. I want to thank everyone for attending. I'll keep the feed open, actually. If you have questions, you can drop them into the chat and I will check them. Otherwise, I'm going to mute at this point. Thanks, everyone, for attending. It's 5:30. I'm going to end the stream. Thank you.